So we've discussed while loops already. This is the same setup. I'm actually not going to be using my potentiometer here. Let me get out of the code. So this potentiometer I'm not using. You open up the code. I think I accidentally pressed delete, so there we go. So what I've done here, let's look at this while loop. I kind of have the same setup as our for loop. My two LEDs, they're set up as outputs. But let's look at the loop. The loop is where things are a little bit different here. So inside the loop, what I do is I have an unsigned integer, and I start it off at 0, and it's called count. Then what I'm going to do is I say while count is less than 10, I want it to flash these LEDs. Hopefully we're getting pretty familiar with this code to flash something, to blink something. Turn the red one off, the blue one on, wait. Turn the red one on, the blue one on, and wait. But what I've done, remember, in a while loop, we have to change the variable that we are using in our condition. So what I've done here is I've just said count plus plus. And what that's going to do is it's going to add 1 to count every single time that it hits this line. So that means that this scope is going to run 10 times, and then count is going to get bigger each time, and eventually count will equal 10. This will then be false because 10 is not less than 10, which means it will kick it out. It will turn off. And I added this delay for a reason. I'm going to comment it out for now. Pretend this delay is not here, and let's see what happens. So what should happen is this should run 10 times, and then it should turn off. Start simulation. All right, so we see it flashing. It's probably been more than 10 times. It's flashing relatively quickly. It doesn't seem to be turning off. And so sometimes this happens when you're writing code. It'll do something, and you'll say it looks like it's working, and then all of a sudden it's not. It's kind of working. How are we going to tell? Well, one thing I want to do here is I want to print the value of count. And again, why do I always talk about adding prints to things? I want to know what's happening. I'm using count as a variable to get in and out of the while loop. I need to know what that value is so that I can better design and write my sketch and figure out what's going on. So we'll clear this from the last time, and let's see what happens. So it's counting up, and we see that it just keeps going through 0 to 9. So it's not quite doing what we think. Now let's look at the code and see if we can figure out why that's happening. So it's running through here, and it's never printing 10. And it shouldn't, because when it's 9, right, when it's 8, it comes through here and it prints 8. It blinks, it turns it to 9, comes up here, prints the 9, blinks, then it changes it to 10, but before it can come up here and print a 10, it checks and it says, we're not allowed to be in here, count equals 10. So what happens is it jumps out of here, turns things off momentarily, hops back up to the beginning of my loop, and resets count to 0. So it probably is working. But the thing is, every single time it goes through my void loop, it resets count to 0. So there's a couple things we could do. Number one, I could put this global. I start count off at 0, and the next time I go through my loop, I can't reset it. It's just going to stay at 10. It printed 9. That was the last time I told it to print. These turned off, and they should never turn on again because count is too big. Now if I want it to flash those LEDs and then do something else for a while, and then I want it to reset back to 0, if I do want this back in here with the possibility of resetting back to 0, not that. There we go. One thing that you can always do is you can add a delay in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this 10 times. I'm going to turn them off, and I'm going to tell it to wait for 3 seconds. I want to see if they turn off. And if they turn off, then I know it's working. But what it should do is it should jump back in because count gets reset to 0 after that 3-second delay. So we have a delay here, and then we go back in. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so it seems to be working now. So this is a while loop that I'm counting things with. Now, things are kind of spread out. I have a way to get in, I have a condition, and I have a way to get out. All a for loop is pulling these together so that they're not so spread out. I'm putting them together in a much more concise way. And I'm going to write my for loop right here as a comment first so that we can see what they're going to look like together. So I'm going to write the word for instead of a while. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put the way my starting value in right here. My very first thing that I put in my for loop is going to be my starting value. I'm going to do a semicolon, and then what I'm going to put in is I'm going to put in my condition. Semicolon, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the way that I'm changing that variable in my condition, and I'm going to end it with a parenthesis. So you'll see here, this looks much more complicated. There's a lot more stuff here, but really all I've done is I've consolidated. I've made things a little bit tighter. Instead of having these 3 things spread out, I put them on one line. Where are we starting? Let's check to see if it's true. Now, how are we going to change this value to see if things are still true? So every single time through the loop, I'm going to get into my for loop. It's going to start count equaling 0. It's going to check to see if it's true, and if it is, it will run through my scope once. Once it's run through, it will change my variable. Now count equals 1. Is it still true? Yes. Run through again. Count now equals 2. Still true. It'll go through. It'll run the exact same way the while loop will run. But what I've done is I've tightened things up. I don't need all this stuff spread out. And sometimes having things spread out makes things a little bit more confusing. Did I put everything in? Is it in the right place? Is it in the right order? Start simulation. It's going to work exactly the same, and this is all a for loop does.